Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you all for being here today. Today is a special meeting of the Board of Governors to discuss the issues surrounding San Francisco City College. We are very pleased and thankful that we have several members from both the board and staff at San Francisco City College to discuss those with us today. To kind of frame this, let me explain that I guess it was probably a month or two ago when San Francisco City College received notice of some accreditation issues, along with us being informed from former Chancellor Scott that we had a couple other community colleges that were facing some accreditation type issues. This board requested that I, along with the Chancellor, reach out to San Francisco City College in particular, offer what assistance we could, but that also we wanted to express our concern that what I think is our largest college was going through some issues, and that certainly our concern for the students, the community, and that in our role as an oversight body, we wanted to express that concern, but most of all, we wanted to figure out how we could help. To that end, Chancellor Scott and now Acting Chancellor Skinner arranged for FCMAT to come in to take a look at the financial picture of San Francisco City College. I think they produced an excellent report. We're fortunate to have the director of FCMAT here today to talk to us about that. Chancellor Scott and I also visited the board meeting at San Francisco City College, where we again expressed our concern as well as our support, and at that time Chancellor Scott suggested to San Francisco City College that they take steps to hire a special trustee. I'm very glad that action has that the board has agreed to that, and I know our staff is working with the interim chancellor and the board to see that that happens. In addition, this board requested that I call a special meeting. That's today, so that we could hear from everybody, and that this board have an opportunity to ask questions and more fully understand all of the issues that we go as we go through that. So with that, I'm going to begin our meeting. First, I'd like to ask Acting Chancellor Skinner if he'd like to make a few comments, and then we will proceed.
President Himmelstein, I don't have much to add. I think that was very well put in terms of the purpose of the meeting and the context. I'd only add that we in the Chancellor's Office have been hard at work in terms of taking steps to both stay apprised of the situation, ongoing developments in the district, as well as taking steps to recruit and identify a special trustee for the district. And that's on the agenda as a third item, and so the board will have an opportunity to get an update on that. But I would just say that throughout this, the district leadership, Chancellor Fisher in particular, have been very forthcoming and helpful in terms of providing information, and we appreciate that, and we look forward to having our board have the opportunity to become more fully informed this afternoon.
Before I begin, would any members of the board like to make any comments? Okay, about process or anything? Okay. With that, I'm going to ask Joel Montero, who is the CEO of FCMAT, to come up and talk about his report. I knew Joel when I was up here in the Secretary's office, have very high regard for him and his organization. They have a strong reputation of just the facts only, and that's evident in his report. With that, Joel, please proceed.
Thank you so much, President Himmelstein, Board, Chancellor Skinner. I appreciate being here and having the opportunity to chat a little bit about Community College of San Francisco, some of the work that we've done there over this past few months, along with the Chancellor's Office and staff in the Chancellor's Office and staff in the district as well, by the way, which we found to be very helpful. I probably need to preface anything that I say with the comment that at no time when we were in the district did we get anything but help and assistance, and when we asked for data, to the extent that they could produce it and give it to us, it was always forthcoming. It was a very abbreviated timeline for a report like this. We spent a couple of months, probably should have spent about 6. And that being said, there are some stones still left unturned. There's more work to do there. I'm confident that the staff has been working diligently along with the Chancellor's staff to move forward and begin to address some of their fiscal issues, which are, if you've had a chance to look at the report, significant and serious, as a matter of fact. And so I'm looking around and see that you have, most of you have at least, a copy of the report. And so I will refer to that as I move forward. Of course, as we always do in the Fiscal Crisis Management Assistance Team, we had help from very good, strong, in this case, community college individuals that helped us move forward. Mike Hill, Roy Stutzman, and Ron Gerhardt were 3 individuals that worked with us day in and day out, hand in hand, to try to put together both the findings and recommendations that are in this particular report. My colleague, Michelle Plumtree, was actually the lead in the report for us on the ground in the college. Couldn't be here today as she's on a month-long jury assignment in Sonoma County, and so I'm sitting in for her by myself today. Most of you know, and I think that President Himmelstein has described it pretty accurately, but just to give you a brief bit of background, Fiscal Crisis Management Assistance Team, known by almost everyone as FICMAT, have to kind of watch out where you put the vowels sometimes, but FICMAT is an external independent agency of the state of California. And therefore, we really don't have an agenda one way or another. Our job, as President Himmelstein says, is to go in, try to do the best that we can do to collect data, approach every engagement relative to a scope of work, and the scope of work on this particular engagement, which is in the background that you have in front of you, was very significant, and then provide a list of findings and recommendations that address those issues or that scope of work. What I will tell you about the report, and if you've looked through it and had a chance even to read the executive summary, what you will find is that, consistent with all of the work that we've done over about the last 20 years or so in California, the reports take the nature of a deficit analysis. And I like to mention that on the front end, because many times folks will look at our reports and get an impression that there's absolutely nothing positive happening in the entity that we're looking at, in this case, Community College of San Francisco. Well, I'm here to tell you today that there are many good things happening in Community College of San Francisco, many positive aspects. We got to move around the college a little bit and look at instruction going on, and the staff working day in and day out, the faculty certainly dedicated. But all of those things you won't find in this report. That's not what this report is about. This report is about fiscal health analysis for the most part. So let me just talk briefly about the primary scope of the report. In short, and you'll see it there in the front section of the report, and I'll just read it directly in the language that it's presented to you, and provide analysis and recommendations that will assist Community College of San Francisco in developing a district-wide multi-year financial plan in order to sustain budget and cash solvency and sustain financial stability. So overall, if you're looking at the purpose of the report, that's it, really. 2 major categories, and they're different. The first one is a solvency issue. It's a budget and a cash solvency issue. So when we think of budget, we think of long-term. Budget is the operational plan for the district. It's that piece of their organization from an administrative and governance point of view that they use as a blueprint to try to guide their activities and providing instruction, the best possible instruction to students in their system. It's a long-term, long-range sort of issue. Budgets don't have cash in them. There's no money in a budget. A budget is simply a document that tries to estimate how much you're going to receive in revenue, how much you're going to spend, and whether or not you have any left at the end. In the case of Community College of San Francisco, there's none left at the end. And that therein is the problem. Therein lies the problem for us in this particular college, looking in multi-years. Money there at the end today, but not in the future. So that is the solvency issue. The budget issue is something that will be handled and addressed over a long period of time in a multi-year type projection. Most generally speaking, 3 years, current plus 2 additional in the future. The cash issue is a day-to-day issue. There are a lot of extenuating circumstances related to Community College of San Francisco that are affecting all community colleges in California that have to do with the state's economy, where we are in terms of California, and its ability to earn its own revenue, balance its own budget, and provide support to all of our public agencies in the education sector. Along with that, of course, Proposition 30 is looming on the horizon at November 6th. That will have an impact significantly on not only Community College of San Francisco, but all community colleges throughout the state. In the case of San Francisco specifically, they also have a parcel tax election on their coming up in their future that again would provide some support financially for the college and help them move forward. So a lot of related issues, but in a sense, again, it's budget, how we're going to deal with the budget in a multi-year, and the cash issue, which is a day-to-day sort of bread and milk money issue. It's how much money you actually have in the bank. How do you make payroll every month? How do you pay people? How do you buy the materials that you need to sustain the college? How do you address the maintenance issues of the building, so on and so forth? Those are cash issues and immediate and separate from budget issues. The other issue, of course, is sustainable financial stability. In this environment and market, that has become more and more difficult, not only because of what's gone on now and in the past in the college, but certainly what's going on in the state of California. With no recovery apparent soon in California's economy, it leaves it to local entities to spend a lot of time trying to figure out how they're going to navigate in a period of lack of resource. And we do have lack of resource, generally speaking. That affects Community College of San Francisco at some level. It's not their entire problem. In addition to that primary scope of work, a couple of other bullets I think that are significant that we agreed to provide to the college upon our exit and when we left. And the first is a fiscal health analysis. Part and parcel, that's the work that FICMET does. We provide what's your fiscal health? We look at that both from the point of view of your budget, what's your general budget health, and what's your general cash position and health over time. Cash a shorter-term issue, budget a longer-term issue. Most of the information you should know in terms of data gathering for this particular engagement is 2011-12 information. That's the most current auditable information that we had out of the district's system, given that they are in fiscal year 12-13. We did have some interim data, what we call unaudited actual information or spending expenses to date that we could use and try to verify whether or not the information that we looked at in the prior year was viable and whether or not it was consistent with the trend that we saw behind and then moving forward. But again, it's not based on information that is immediately available to us today within the current year, because that's not how the data system is populated. Any data system, not just San Francisco's. And I will say, because that's true, you have to always look at these sorts of reports as sort of a snapshot in time. And this one is no different either. Interim Chancellor Fisher and her staff, the board certainly in San Francisco, have been working day in and day out. They didn't sit back and wait for us to give them the report and think, well, once they're out of here, we'll start thinking about what we're going to do. Really, from an ongoing point of view, with the help of the Chancellor's office and the staff in San Francisco, they wanted to know, what can you tell us we can be doing right now today? And so my sense is that they are working right along on a day-to-day basis. Even though the report is fresh, they had been working to try to implement issues. And so if you were to go back today, given that we looked at fiscal year 11-12 data, you would see likely some improvements in some areas today based on the work that's being done there and the fact that we used the audible information that we had. So fiscal health analysis. The other issue is multi-year financial projection. Fiscal year, multi-year financial projections, current year plus 2 additional year based on assumptions that we try to pull together, how much revenue we think we're going to receive, how much spending is going to happen in a particular system moving forward, is a key element of any planning process for an entity and organization as large as this one. We didn't find good, strong multi-years there, but left with at least a model for them to utilize in moving forward. If you look on page 6 of the report, you can see some of the result of the multi-year projection, at least in an analysis of how their revenues and expenditures could fall out, given assumptions about whether or not Proposition 30 passes or fails on November 6th and whether or not their parcel tax fails or passes at the same time. If you look at the bottom graph on page 6, lower right-hand corner, what you'll find is that even in the best case scenario, if both the parcel tax and Proposition 30 are successful, even in the best case scenario, the multi-year shows current plus 2, that they're still in a deficit position, negative numbers of about $2.5 million at that particular time. The other issue that we agreed to in terms of the scope was to give the college some sense of how they fared relative to a handful of comparison districts. I will tell you right up front that there's really no community college just like San Francisco. They're all different, and San Francisco is a unique college, as the others are as well. But still, from a comparative analysis, looking at other colleges across the state, both in terms of geography, numbers of students, FTES, the number of full-time equivalent staff, you can begin to get a sense, at least from a comparison perspective, how they fare with other colleges. The colleges that we use for comparison in this particular report are Santa Monica, Long Beach, Foothill De Anza, Mount San Antonio, and El Camino in Southern California. And that provided us, I think, some great information relative to our findings and helped us make recommendations to the college that I think are legitimate and accurate. Remember, again, just a reminder, this is not an audit. It's not a technical audit. So we didn't go in and audit strictly just number issues. We were looking at a much broader sort of holistic view in terms of fiscal health of the district, where they've been over the last 10 years or so, and where we hope to go. Audits more specifically, if we had gone in and done an audit, what we normally audit or what you audit is just prior year. We looked at a much broader spectrum for Community College of San Francisco, as we would in any college, to try to get a sense from trend analysis point of view how they got into the situation that they're in, so that we could better inform the board and the staff about how to move forward. Remember also that simultaneously, as of March of 2012, I believe, that the Accreditation Commission in California, ACCJC, had issued a show cause, finding of show cause to the district. People get confused about the relationship between the accreditation process and the work that FCMAT does in terms of fiscal health, financial accountability, and providing a roadmap on the fiscal side to move forward. The two things are not connected directly. Certainly our work may inform the Accreditation Commission as they move forward and try to make decisions about how they're going to work with Community College of San Francisco in the future, but they're not required to do that. Our job, separate from theirs, is to really provide in real time, immediately, information that they can use to move forward. So with all of that said, what did we actually find? What we found is an organization in the midst of fiscal financial crisis, as you might expect. No secrets there. It's taken the district a good amount of time to get to this particular point. In other words, it didn't happen overnight. It's been a long time in coming, and is the result of, at some level, failed policy, at some level, failed administrative support, at some level simple poor decision making, and at some level just simple bad luck. A variety of elements have conspired in this particular organization to bring it to the point where it is today, wherein they no longer can wait to make decisions, but really have their backs against the wall and have to do things, as it were, immediately to try to right the ship. Just as it's taken a good amount of time for the college to arrive at this particular place, so then will it take a particular amount of time to move beyond this spot in a healthy fiscal sort of way. We shouldn't expect for immediate change overnight. There's a lot of moving parts in this community college and a lot of work to be done. I'm confident that current administration, staff, and board are in a place where they're dedicated to do that. As you may know, we delivered the report to them in detail, which I'm not going to do today, thank goodness for you, 2 or 3 weeks ago, and the board couldn't have been more receptive, as was the staff. Asked very, very good questions over about a 2.5-hour period in the board meeting, and my sense of that reinstated or stated their commitment to move forward and do what needs to be done to make sure that this college is fiscally healthy in the future. So, didn't get there overnight is what we found, and that it is in fiscal crisis. We verified that. Community College San Francisco is well above its peers in terms of FTE staffing. That is, they have more staff than their comparison districts relative to their FTES, the number of students that they have. And it's more by a fairly significant amount. You'll see that if you want to look in the administrative summary, executive summary, somewhere around page 10 or 11 has an analysis of staff and FTES based on, again, 2011-12 numbers. I'm sure the numbers are different today. The approach of the college has been to try to reduce staff through attrition, and they have done that. As a matter of fact, if you go back even 5 or 6 years, you will see that the numbers of staff they had 5 or 6 years ago far greater than they have today. So by attrition, they have been able to reduce staff. Still, with that, they're above their comparison groups by a significant amount. And we do that analysis and found that they have up to twice as many FTE per 1,000 FTES. And so that's the comparison metric. Per 1,000 FTES, how many staff per 1,000 in their comparison group, and how does that relate to what San Francisco has? They spend about somewhere between 17 and 18 million more than their comparison districts on FTEs, full-time equivalent staff. And so not only are their numbers bigger, they spend more money to support them. I mean, it's public sector education, right? It's not, there's no secret in California public education, whether or not it's in the K-12 sector, community college, or CSU UC system. You can pay fewer people more money, or more people less money, and have a balanced budget. But you can't pay more people more money and have a balanced budget for very long. And the situation that we have in San Francisco is more people with relatively higher salaries than their comparison groups. That's a piece of their problem. Again, at the same time, Community College San Francisco well above its faculty obligation number, so they're obligated to have, under current statute and law, certain number of full-time equivalent staff, and they are well above that number, what we call the FON, as a result of their comparison groups and in their calculation as a college. They have more classified staff also, not only certificated but classified staff than their comparison districts do, at a higher salary and a greater level of expenditure than their comparison groups. Community College San Francisco has not properly addressed or funded future costs for workers' comp, capital outlay, and retiree health benefit costs. I'll talk a little bit more about the unfunded liability for retiree benefit health costs in a few minutes. But basically, these are 3 particular areas where, on the capital outlay piece, they've had a little bit of extra money that they've been able to utilize and apply that's running out. They haven't really planned for what to do when that money's gone. And so they will have capital needs moving forward, and we see really no significant planning around how they're going to address those particular issues significantly in the future. Same thing true, workers' compensation issues. Workers' compensation also, it tends to be a future unfunded liability problem for the college in terms of being able to assess the amount of your obligation, put that money away and or save money to be able to defeat that particular, what in effect is a debt in the future, and the college has not addressed that particular issue at a significant level. It's not inconsistent for us to see colleges who suffer fiscal issues to forget about future obligations in lieu of just getting through the year this year. You can't operate very long on a year-to-year basis in that mentality. Because of where we are in terms of the state's fiscal situation, you really have to be expert and diligent about long-range planning at this particular point in California education. Community College San Francisco relies on one-time short-term solutions to respond to financial issues, not implemented layoffs at any significant level. Closed sites or eliminated programs as cost containment or budget reduction effort. Actually, 12-13 budget, that's the year that we're in this year, their budget, based on the assumptions that they have chosen, is actually balanced in this year. It goes upside down next year and then way upside down in the third year out. But they're showing a balanced budget, although without reserve or significant fund balance in the current year. But that's based on the assumption that Proposition 30 will be successful. And it's also based on assumption that revenue will continue to flow to the college at pretty much the level that it's flowed in the past. They have assessed a 0.7% reduction in revenue looking forward into the out years, but from our perspective, the reduction in revenue probably be far greater than that moving forward. And so those two assumptions combined, the assumption that Prop 30 will be successful and the assumption that the revenues generated by the state that go to the college will be about the same as they were in the past, probably not going to hold up for them. And so that is, that's looking at the current year as sort of the best case scenario financially. However, and I'm not here to talk about Prop 30, but right now, today, Prop 30 looks pretty iffy. And so we're calling it a dead heat, and I think that's probably the best case scenario. And you have to figure that even if it does pass, the way that funding would be eventually distributed may not come in time for this college relative to the severity of their financial position today. So in multi-year projections, your assumption, which are just guesses basically, can either hurt you or help you. And our finding and recommendation to the college is to plan a little bit more restrictively and a little bit more conservatively as you make assumptions about where things how things are going to play out. Community College San Francisco will deficit spend in the range of $2.5 million to $27.8 million by fiscal year 14-15, based on their current staffing program levels and obligations. Remember that, again, and I've mentioned it already, that we based most of our data and analysis and findings on data that we collected from prior years, so 11-12. We also make assumptions, and frankly, the reason that we do it is because it's the easiest way to do it and continue to maintain an apples-to-apples comparison. And that is, we assume in our projections that everything that is occurring today, every expenditure, size of staff, number of FTES, will be the same in 2 years as it is now. Well, we all know that's not the truth. Certainly this college, the folks in this college know enough and are smart enough and have asked for help to try to figure out how that's not going to be the case in 2 years. But for our analysis, looking forward, we have to assume that nothing changes. And if nothing were to change, we would look at between a number that is much larger than it probably will be at 2.5 to 7.8 million. But still, if you look on page 6 at that second graph, no matter what happens, again, we're still looking at a situation where the likelihood is that in year 3, they are in a deficit position by a couple $1 million at least. Community College San Francisco spends more than it can afford with respect to compensation of employees. That's total comp. So when we talk total comp, we're talking not only salary, we're talking health benefits, and we're talking statutory benefits that must be paid by the college as well. So let me talk just a little bit about this so that lest no one be confused. Labor is not the villain in Community College of San Francisco. Do they have more staff than their comparison districts? They do. Do they pay them relatively more than their comparison districts? They do. But those are not, those issues should not be laid at the feet of labor. That's what labor does. And at some point, governance, system, and administration has to say yes to collective bargaining issues as we move forward. And so it's an easy short stretch to immediately look at labor and say, well, labor's the problem. Well, the fact of the matter is, in public systems, whether it's community college or K-12, we spend most of our money on people. In the categories of, at least in the K-12 system, what we call the 1s, 2s, and 3s, salaries and benefits, we are spending somewhere in the neighborhood of about 94 cents of every dollar on people today. That's up from about 84 cents prior to 2007-8 of every dollar on people. And that will become more as the state's issues continue to exacerbate funding and supportive programs at the local level. The real key is, if you're going to make those kinds of agreements, and if your intention, for whatever reason, philosophically or organizationally, is to maintain a system with a larger number of staff and pay them in terms of total comp more than your comparison districts, then you have to make concessions for that in other parts of the organization. You can't do both. So in other words, again, as I mentioned before, fewer people, more money, or less money, fewer people, more money, more people, less money, but you can't pay more people more money. You have to make some policy decisions as an organization moving forward as it relates to compensation. But be that as it may, the fact of the matter is Community College of San Francisco spends significantly more than their comparison group on total comp. They have also, and I mentioned this before and said I would talk about it a little bit here, they have a looming debt that I can't think of any other term to describe it other than scary in their future for retiree benefits. So as you're probably mostly aware, when someone retires and you choose to provide them health coverage into their retirement, there is an actuarial assessment that goes on that tries to figure out, oddly as it may sound, how long people are going to live beyond retirement, and then how much it's going to cost to actually fund their retirement costs for that period of time. At the end of the line of that, we call that an unfunded liability. So that's the big number, and in the case of San Francisco, that number's fairly large. I think in excess of 30 million or so. Interim Chancellor Fisher probably knows that number exactly. I can't recall it at the moment. But in addition to that, as you move forward year to year, you have money that must come out of your general fund unrestricted budget to actually pay for the benefits of those people who are retired and living now. And so you can imagine, as people live longer and as more people retire, and by the way, San Francisco Community College will have over the next 5 to 7 years, again, more people retire, so their obligation for retiree benefits will continue to grow. However, if you look at it just today, that is an obligation of $6.9 million that comes right off the top of their revenue before they do anything else. If you extend it out to fiscal year 2021, that $6.9 million doubles, almost more than doubles to $13 million. So you can see that this is a little bit of a ticking time bomb for Community College of San Francisco. Not only Community College of San Francisco, the state has a similar problem. The state of California has a similar problem, as do other community colleges. The issue is...
Joel, could I, just for a minute, because
Yes.
confused, and you said that the looming debt on retiree benefits is somewhere around $30 million per year.
No.
And then you said then we had a debt of 6.9
Yeah.
million. So I'm confused.
So first of all, I had the number wrong, but
Okay.
let me explain the difference between the two.
Okay.
So the actuarial does this calculation of how much the long-term obligation is for the district moving out for the next 20 years or so.
Okay.
So if you had to pay that bill today, the unfunded liability, Pam just informs me, is $220 million. So that's the credit card. That's money on the credit card, if you will, looking out way in the future.
20 years.
20 years, about 20. It depends on, I don't know how the actuarial was done. Generally 20 years is how far out they go. But still, you have to pay premiums for those people who are in the system today, and we call that pay-as-you-go.
Yeah.
So the pay-as-you-go amount is today $6.9 million. That's to pay the premium for people who are retired today who receive health coverage as a result of collective bargaining agreement. Right. And so as time goes on, because of two things, the growth in the number of retirees, which is going to be significant for Community College of San Francisco, and the growth in the cost of health care, which in California and the nation will be significant, that pay-as-you-go amount increases every single year. And our analysis is by the time you get to 2021, fiscal year 2021 for San Francisco, it doubles from where it is today. So it's going to grow significantly faster than any growth in revenue, either by COLA or by simple revenue acceptance and delivery from the state. So they're in a situation where their pay-as-you-go amount will grow faster than their general fund unrestricted will grow, and therefore it will continue to erode their spending ability as time moves on. What you do to mitigate that is that you begin to put money aside to fund that unfunded liability and eventually pay as you go to the extent that you can, and build a fund to mitigate that impact to your budget on an annual basis. And probably the best way to do that is to put money in an irrevocable trust for that purpose. So that means once the money goes in there, you can't take it out for anything else. Sometimes we see public organizations just put it in a different fund. Unfortunately, when you just put it in a different fund, you can steal from it if things don't go the way you want. So we would rather see it in an irrevocable trust. But in the case of San Francisco, they're not putting any or enough to mitigate that issue looking forward and into the future. Sorry for that confusion. Community College San Francisco has serious issues with data information availability and therefore is unable to support its governance system and informed decision making, especially true in the analysis of the off-site centers and sites. So you have the main campus of Community College of San Francisco, which is substantial. They also have a number of off-site locations. And unfortunately, their data systems are either not configured in such a way or they don't code information or expenditures in such a way that allows them to really look critically at how those sites are operating and how the college operates relative to being able to provide good, succinct information to their board and to their administration and inform their decision making about how they move forward and how they might cost contain or make reductions in the future. And so we've made several recommendations related to their data system, improving their data system, their coding system in terms of their ability to extract information from all of their systems to inform decision making moving forward in the future. Any good system, for systems that fail, and we are in a lot of systems that fail, for systems that fail, one of the aspects and one of the parts of their profile always is that they don't control their data. They don't data manage well. They either don't code information correctly, or even if they do, they don't extract from the system and utilize that information and or have data quality to inform decision making at the board level, and that's what we found in this particular area. Community College San Francisco has a unique management structure wherein the primary responsibility for academic management rests primarily with department chairs who are given release time for that purpose. More traditional management system would have most of those responsibilities vested in deans at the local level. From my perspective personally, I could care less how you do it, but you can't have both. You can't spend a lot of money on release time and vest management decisions at the department chair level and still employ deans. You do it one way or another, and I know that there's a lot of arguments back and forth about which way is best, but really that's not what we do. We don't make those sort of policy assessments about the better or best way to do it. We leave that to Chancellor Fisher and her staff and the board. But the fact of the matter is you really can't do both. That's an expenditure that we thought, and particularly the level of reassignment time in the college was very significant, well above really off the chart with respect to any of their comparison districts or comparison colleges. So those are the large findings. My effort today, my intention is not to go through the entire report as we did with the board and talk about each one of the findings and each one of the recommendations. Read it at your leisure when you have 20 or 30 hours of nothing else to do. And you'll find a lot of information in there. We do think it's a legitimate report and we think it's accurate. But those are the those 6 or 8 things that I just mentioned are the big picture elements of the report in terms of findings. Let me give you a couple of sample recommendations. And some of these, as I mentioned before, the staff and board are working on as we speak. The first one, of course, and you might expect coming from Fiscal Crisis Management Assistance Team that this would be in the mix, stop deficit spending. Sounds so simple, but in this market, it's not as simple as it may appear. We look at deficit spending, that is, in a given fiscal year, spending more than you receive, as the villain of solvency moving into the future. You can't have a structural deficit running through your budget for multiple years, which San Francisco has, and come out the other side with any sort of fiscal health. Again, we only really look at deficit spending as it relates to the general fund unrestricted. The college has a lot of other kinds of programs, categorical programs, restricted side programs, enterprise programs like bookstores and whatnot, but we isolate only on, from a deficit spending point of view, general fund unrestricted. And so our primary recommendation is you got to stop doing that. You got to start living within your means and figure out how you're going to not deficit spend now in the future. Along with that, recommendation, build reserves and fund balance. The district operates with not nearly enough in reserve, which is basically one-time money. The protocol relative to California is to maintain a 5% reserve. In this market, probably not enough given where we are because of 2 things. The relative unhealth of the state of California and inability for any of us in the public sector to figure out how much revenue we're going to have next year is number one. The second and even more hideous thing is the function of the state, particularly to defer or to delay cash payments to all public entities at this point. We call those cash deferrals. Because the state of California is deferring a very significant amount of cash payments on the cash side to community colleges. Our approach has been, and our recommendation always is, to maintain higher reserves because that's what mitigates loss in cash. And remember, once you run out of cash, it's game over. You can have unbalanced budget till the cows come home and still survive and keep moving forward. But once you run out of cash, bread and milk money, game over. So because you can't afford to run out of cash, one of the ways to mitigate that is to maintain higher reserves and larger fund balance moving forward, and that's one of our recommendations. Assess and address the issue with data management and its use, self-explanatory. You just have to do a better job of using the data system. They have a data system, and as a matter of fact, they're working right now to upgrade the data system and make it work for them better. They really have to address that and attack that issue. It's critical to the board, it's critical to the administration to inform the board and have the board have informed decision making. They need data to make decisions, and they have to address that. Make enrollment management. We found they didn't have a very good enrollment management system, if at all. And so we're saying it has to be a key component of strategic planning. I mean, that's really the nuts and bolts of the system, right? You're going to be funded based on how you manage your FTES. That's the revenue engine of any system. And so if you're not good at managing that system, moving it forward, understanding how it works, and then using the data you derive from it to inform decision making, you're going to struggle. Address issues with the management structure. Again, for me personally, it doesn't matter how they do it, but they can't do both. They've got to figure out how they're going to assess and use release time, how much release time they're going to have, whether or not department chairs are going to continue to have the management role that they have currently. If that's going to be reassigned, that's a key recommendation for them to review. And again, along with that, review all of the issues with respect to faculty release time, create, assess, and constantly use multi-year projection as the primary planning tool. It's not a perfect tool. Multi-year projection will never be a perfect planning tool because it's based on assumptions, and nobody can predict the future. However, you can get reasonably close. And for planning purposes, multi-year projection is still the best tool that we have for long-range planning. Remember, multi-year projection is a budget planning tool, not a cash tool. So you use multi-year projection, you make assumptions about where you think you are and where you may be based on those assumptions in the future. It's the best tool we have, and it is best practice to use it in this situation. Develop and implement an accounting and data protocols that enable the district to determine the full cost of operating its 9 ancillary sites. San Francisco is a fairly small urban sector, and 9 sites are a lot of sites in addition to the main site of the main campus. They may be warranted. We didn't do that analysis, and I don't think you could pull enough data out to actually do the analysis right now, but it has to be done. It's an expensive proposition to run an off-site campus or an ancillary campus, and what you need to figure out is whether or not it's doing what you want it to do, whether or not you could do it more effectively, more efficiently at the main campus, which is, as you've probably all been there, a large, beautiful campus in the middle of San Francisco. But again, regardless of how it plays out, some decision has to be made whether or not the return on investment of running that many ancillary campuses is a good idea. And the staff and board will have to sort that out as they move forward. So with that, just let me say, as I started out, the fiscal issues for Community College San Francisco are significant, severe, and I think anything that you read in the report is not exaggerated. Certainly, and I would be the first to admit, because this is at a point-in-time report, time's gone by already since we produced it, and I'm sure that the numbers today are different than they were then. And specifically, given that we used audible data from the prior year as our base, I'm sure that I'm hopeful that they've made progress. But still, the fact remains they have lots of work to do and a lot of issues that are significant. They simply can't contain the cost structure that they have given their current revenue. That's clear. And so what does that mean, really? I mean, it's really just a fancy way of saying somebody's going to have to make some tough decisions here quickly. They don't have a lot of time. They're at show cause with the Accreditation Commission. Accreditation Commission looks at their finance and fiscal issues as well. They're looking for them to make significant progress moving forward. We hope we've given them a roadmap for that and that the report provides a roadmap for that. But the fact of the matter is they just don't have a lot of time. The back's against the wall, so to speak. And so why we would wish, as I mentioned earlier, it takes a lot of time to get to this point, and we would wish that you would have a lot of time to get out of it. The fact of the matter is Community College of San Francisco doesn't have a lot of time. They've got to do some things quickly and really look at this current plus the next 2 years in a very dramatic way to try to figure out how to move forward. This is a college that has tended to, over the last 10 years, live year to year. What do we have to do to get through next year? And so a lot of short-term, what you see if you go back in their history is a lot of short-term solutions to very complex problems. And in most ways, that has brought them to this point and in fact has made their situation worse. I mean, I guess you could argue, yeah, but we did survive year to year. We did get at least a year. But now looking back in retrospect and what they're going to have to do moving forward, those one-time decisions that lacked a long-term horizon and vision places them in a spot now where they really have to do something quickly and don't have a lot of time to do it, and has made their situation, I'm sure, more challenging. Finally, I would say, in answer to the question, which I know will likely be asked at some point, can they do it? Sure, they can do it. Will it be easy to do? No, it won't be easy to do. It will be very, very difficult, and just like the situations that got them into this particular fix, that included not making decisions fast enough, and a little bit of bad luck here and there, they're going to have some good luck, and they're going to have to be very diligent about how they move forward and very strategic, both in their planning and their decision making, with a very tight governance system and administrative structure that stays focused now on the end game, because that's where they are. They simply don't have a lot of time. What do they need to do? They need focus, long-term planning horizon, use their data better, cooperation among all the constituents in the community, students, faculty, other staff, administration, the board, the community, chancellor's office as a support system. Need a stable administration and governance system that can make and will make good informed decisions, and a little bit of courage, because it's not going to be easy and or likely pretty moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Joel, for that excellent report, and we very much appreciate FCMAT's work. I, for one, am struck by the sheer magnitude of the issues presented. Hearing it from you directly is a lot different than reading the report, and the clarity on how you presented was illuminating. But I'm very, very concerned about the magnitude of the issues that you present, and the vast array of problems that San Francisco City College faces here. And I have a number of questions, but I'm going to defer to my colleagues first. So, members, any questions of Member Azumi, then Member Malumet?
Well, Joel, I wanted to thank you too very much for that excellent report, and to reiterate what President Himmelston said, the magnitude is overwhelming.
Member Azumi, could I ask you to move your mic in a little bit? A little hard to hear there.
Just a quick question about when you said that once the money runs out, then it's game over.
Mm-hmm.
How close is it to game over? I mean, in terms of, the money actually running out.
From a cash perspective, well, it's dependent on a few things. So let's start with the most obvious. The most obvious is in terms of cash. Now remember, we're talking cash now, not budget. So you got to kind of take your planning hat off for a second and just think logistics for a few minutes. So a couple of things pretty obvious. Depending upon how the state recovers or doesn't will determine how the state views their cash position, and then will determine by extension how they deal with cash deferrals. Our cash deferrals currently are significant in California. Probably about a third of every dollar that should be going on time to public agencies is not getting there. And so if that amount were to increase, which it will if Proposition 30 does not pass, that will speed the clock up a bit. And so that's the state's relative cash health is one issue. Whether Proposition 30 passes is another issue. Proposition 30, the governor intends in Proposition 30, which would derive revenue at June 10th of 2013. So the money from let's pretend Prop 30 passes. The money doesn't actually get to us or get to the state to be spent until June 10th of 2013, which leaves us a gap again in cash flow. If it does get here at that particular time, the governor's intent is to use a good portion of that, those dollars, to buy out the deferrals. So that would have a positive impact on this cash question, not only for San Francisco, but for every entity in the state. So to the extent that the state's revenue position continues to improve, and it's improving at about 1.7% a year. Projection for this fiscal year is for it to improve by 2.5%. If we were to make that, and if Prop 30 were to be successful, if the college did nothing else, they would probably maintain cash solvency for the current plus next two, if they did nothing else. If the state's position, if we don't make 2.5% revenue projection of the state and Prop 30 fails, which will immediately, overnight, increase cash deferral position to local agencies. If the college does nothing within that 3-year sequence, current plus 2, if they did nothing, they would run out of cash. Where it hits exactly, I couldn't tell you because there's too many other factors in play. But that is part of the magnitude of the issue. They have a budget problem, which is a planning problem, and they do have a cash problem as well. And so the good news is Community College of San Francisco has a lot of restricted side programs, and that's cash that they can utilize or interfund borrow to maintain cash flow. Unfortunately, on the accreditation side, if they're not successful in reauthorizing their accreditation, they're going to lose access to some of that categorical money, both at the state and federal level. And of course, students will lose access to financial aid. And so, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of moving parts. But it's not outside the realm of possibility that within between now, the current plus 2 additional, that they could run short on cash if they don't make some very significant decisions.
Thank you very much.
Member Mayo, if I could, Chancellor Skinner would like to make a kind of a clarifying comment.
Yeah, just a clarifying comment in terms of the district's really facing two simultaneous crises, one on the fiscal front and the other on the accreditation front. And so as we think through recovery and timelines, I think it's really important to keep in mind that it's really the accreditation threat that's coming faster and harder.
More immediate.
The fiscal piece will eventually will threaten the district, but it's the accreditation challenges of the October report and then the March report and then a June finding by the Accreditation Commission that is the more immediate threat. And it's all interrelated. I mean, that accreditation report speaks to financial planning, but also deals with issues of governance, of mission, of really kind of broad spread kind of issues. But I think that's the important thing to notice, that this accreditation challenge, if the district doesn't rise to that and maintain accreditation, really at that point, we as a state agency, the Chancellor's Office, is no longer able to provide funding to the college. We only fund accredited colleges. And so at that point, everything blows up. So a lot to manage, and it's all interrelated, but I think the purpose of Joel's presentation was largely on the financial side, and that's, I'm sure, mostly what we'll talk about today, but we can't lose sight of that accreditation issue as well.
And we absolutely agree with Chancellor Skinner. All of us in our jobs, I'm assuming most of you in your jobs, you have that piece of your job that keeps you awake and that wakes you up at 3 in the morning. If this is me in San Francisco, the accreditation issue is what wakes me up at 3 in the morning. That's immediate and serious.
Yeah, but several of the issues that you talked about dealt with accreditation in terms of administrative structure and things like that. So I think it's relevant. Member Malumet.
I have 2 different questions. One is, you mentioned how the satellites have data that are not compatible and can't be working together. Is that a common problem you've seen in other schools or businesses, or is that uncommon?
They don't have a separate data system. So that's the first issue. They're all part of the college's data system. What we found was we couldn't extract enough significant data out of their system that would show us how the revenues flowed and then how dollars were expended for the satellite programs. And the primary issue was that the information wasn't coded. If you're an accountant thinking it through, that they hadn't really coded information with the forethought of saying to themselves, well, eventually we will need to know this about that to make a decision whether or not this makes sense. So it's one data system. It's not working to their advantage because you can't extract enough information out of it to inform decision making.
So is
and
that
that's what we found. And
is
so
that
your
a
question
common
is,
problem, or is that
well,
uncommon?
I would not say it's a common problem. There's a lot of organizations and a lot of community colleges. They all have data system of a type. Some of them are better at data than others. In my experience, I would say, at least for this particular purpose, in terms of the satellite campuses, I would view it as extreme. There's so much. Somewhere in the report, you'll see in there exactly how much money goes in that direction in terms of running those programs at an aggregate level. If there was that much money in my budget that went to support that, I would sure as heck want to make sure that I could figure out whether or not it was doing what it was supposed to do. And in most situations, you can find that out. I wouldn't say in everyone, certainly, but in the situation of Community College San Francisco, we would have expected to see it more significantly presented.
Thank you. And then my second question is, just as you were talking, worst possible scenario, the school does not survive. Where does all that future unfunded liability go? What happens to the employees who are promised all these things?
That's a good question.
I don't know. That's why I'm
Yeah.
asking.
And Chancellor Skinner may have a sense of this as well, but really the college is, in that sense, an independent entity that has negotiated independently its labor contracts. That is their obligation. So you would assume that if they were to default completely, that would become one of their future obligations moving forward, and that if they couldn't mitigate, to use an incorrect term, bankruptcy, if you will, that those obligations could not be satisfied, and so those employees would then go without that support, go without health benefits. The question becomes, in the K-12 sector, Butts versus the state of California has a particular process that doesn't allow school districts to go insolvent. Certainly in Compton Community College, under a similar scenario, similar in some ways, very dissimilar in many other ways, but at least if you looked at it from the point of view of solvency, the state came in with an emergency appropriation. El Camino became a center of El Camino, and that's the way that situation was handled, so that those employees for Compton Community College who also have retiree benefits were able to sustain that as time went on. So, in the worst, the bigger question is, could the worst case scenario happen in California, particularly in a community like San Francisco that has one single community college in a city that is surrounded on three sides by water? It's not so simple for people who are attending those programs in that college just to jump in a car or a bus and go to the next closest. The next closest is not that close. And so, but again, if we were to try to think through, that worst case scenario and complete default, then they would default on all their obligations.
Vice President Baca, then Member Baum.
Well, first of all, thank you for the material and the presentation. It clarifies the situation quite well. I just needed a clarification on a couple of things. You mentioned, and this maybe points to the decision-making process at the City College San Francisco, but you mentioned that you can't do both assigned time and deans as well, I think, in your presentation. But in reading the material, it seems that that the administrative staffing is much less than a comparable district. So could you kind of clarify that relationship with your sign time duties and management duties and the balancer?
I think there's two issues. Certainly, Chancellor Fisher can speak to this as well, and is knows more intimately the detail of the structure and the use of the administrative staff at the college and the department chairs. But from an administrative staffing point of view, a little bit less, equal to or a little bit less than comparison districts. So there's the issue of simply number, how many bodies are assigned for those tasks and where they fit in the structure and what their role is. Then there's the actual management decision-making protocol in terms of the management structure of the system, who's making decisions and how are those decisions made, and how does that, from a fiscal point of view, how do those decisions interact with the realities of the budget, finance, and the fiscal side. So it's not just an issue of how many people there are. We still think there's probably too many. I mean, if you think about it, every faculty person who has release time, this is an expert, professional, highly skilled individual whose the skill set for which they were hired, which is to instruct, is not being used in the classroom, basically. And so you have that issue. But even still, when you compare the number of release time faculty with other comparisons, no matter how you cut it, it's far more than other colleges. So that is one issue, the numbers. Notwithstanding, they may have a little bit smaller administrative staff, but they still have administrative staff that are dedicated to similar functions. And again, Chancellor Fisher can talk more about that. But the other issue is, or the organizational structure of decision-making and management and administration. And what appears to be occurring is that there is not a strong link between the day-to-day decisions that are made in terms of enrollment management, which is a significant issue at the college, and how those things affect the budget. And that's the nexus that we're anxious be more apparent and occur. Again, from my perspective, do it any way you want. And there's
Right.
a lot of people who argue vigorously on one side or the other. I don't have an opinion about
But
that.
over a period of time, this has evolved into what we have today there.
Yes.
I mean, at some point in time, it was much different, I suspect. Or may
Well,
have
you'd have to
been.
go back far
Okay.
to see where it was
But
different.
in recent years, it's kind of pretty much evolved in terms of the shift of
Yes.
responsibility decision-making
Right.
process. I just have one little item for clarification. On page 34, I see a couple of centers there that have 0. Does this point to some of the data issues that you've run into?
Tell me again what the
On page 34,
I don't have page 34
and I haven't
with
had
me.
a chance to look at this entire report, but I just happened to see that there's some zeros with Fort Mason Center and one other one
Yeah.
below it.
It either means that we couldn't extract the data from the system,
Okay.
and I couldn't tell you in Fort Mason or Goff Street which was the case. There was either no information entered, or in fact it was 0. My assumption is we couldn't extract the data, and that's why there were zeros there. So the information was not coded in such a way that we could extract from the system information on those two sites.
But you feel that generally you did get information. I mean, I haven't looked through the rest of this. If there are other areas, but
So let me speak to that for a second, because it's a fair and legitimate question.
Mhm.
And I would be the first person to say and admit that we made some assumptions in this engagement relative to the data. And while we couldn't extract data out of the system for a lot of things that we wanted to extract for, the data that we did extract, we assumed was accurate. They were audited actuals from the prior year. And so to the extent, and we did go back and cross-check in prior years to try to determine to the best of our ability that they were accurate. But we were dependent upon the data that we were able to pull out of their system. And so I think, your point is, are you reasonably confident that you got the right information? We are, to the extent that the information that is actually in the system is accurate, and we think it is. It's just not very usable in the way that it's currently configured. But the information that we didn't find broad inaccuracies in the number information in the financial system.
Okay, we're going to have Member Baum, then Member Belinsky, and then I think want to give our folks from the college a chance to come up. Member Berg as well. So Member Baum.
Thank you very much for this report, and I've gotten the executive summary beforehand, and I think it's very direct, and it should be required reading among every board member and CEO and vice president across the state. I think it provides a good set of principles that we should all be mindful of. I have a couple of questions. One about accreditation, for clarification. Is it possible for the Accreditation Commission to decide to not necessarily act positive or negatively in June and continue the district on show cause for an additional year if they feel that progress is continuing to be made?
It's my understanding that could be an option. I look to Executive Vice Chancellor Bruckman or Vice Chancellor Russell, who both have knowledge about this.
Yeah, I don't think their rules prohibit that, but there are rules that make it difficult or unlikely. For example, if there's an expectation that within 2 years the institution will be off sanction. So if there's 2 years of show cause, it's not feasible that they'll be completely off sanction within 2 years. Having said that, I do not think the Accrediting Commission is precluded from doing that.
For me, the steps that you prescribe in the recommendation, you say they're feasible, but what I see is, having gone through some similar decision-making I'm the president of the board at Pasadena Area Community College District. None of this is obviously easy, and I see a number of things that even if progress was made, it's not going to come swiftly because, in essence, you'd have to suspend collective bargaining contracts and education code provisions in order to make progress on some of these areas. And there's not all the groups will automatically agree to some of that, and perhaps may even file legal action to prevent some of those actions being taken. And we're facing that at our local district.
Yeah.
And so how is that going to?
How reasonable is it to assume? So a couple of things on that point. And by the way, just for everyone's information, we did read the Accreditation Commission's report, particularly the finance area, after we were finished, just to try to verify that they saw some of the same things that we did, which they did. They didn't go as much in depth at a technical level as our report, but they're not inconsistent, so that's one issue. One of the ways that the budget is balanced, forget fund balance and forget reserves, for this year at Community College of San Francisco is as a result of some work that it was done as a result of the collective bargaining process. And so there are some one-time faculty staff impacts that were put in the budget, that were negotiated and put in the budget this year, that allowed them to basically save, cost contain and save. Part of the reason that that their numbers rebound negatively in the out years, 2 and 3, 2 subsequent years, is because those agreements would no longer be valid. I mention that because I think at the very least it gives you some sense of, in a very difficult situation, for the different constituents to work together if they need to. And you're right. If you got 90% of all your money in people, part of the solution has to be coming together of folks and making some decisions about how you cost contain until you get to a point where revenues rebound or your spending is less. So the question becomes, what is the reasonable ability for them to do that? And I think Chancellor Fisher can speak to that issue. I know they work together. Certainly in this year, they have some things that they've negotiated, but moving forward, it will have to be more dramatic in terms of the longer term to make that happen.
Well, that's good. I'm looking forward to hearing from when we hear the representatives from the district to speak to that, because I know that a very small group could bring the whole thing grinding to a halt if everybody's not on the same path. One quick other question then, too. No trustee makes a decision that they think is going to then drive their district off a cliff. But this clearly has been in the makings over a number of years. How can this be used to educate trustees about their due diligence in the decisions that they make, so that they don't face a situation where you make a series of decisions over the course of a term or a semester, whether it's a budget, it's a benefit, it's a negotiation. How can a trustee really know? Because I'm sure each trustee of the San Francisco district thought at the time they were being presented with a sound decision to be made that would be in the best long-term interest of the district. So how does that kind of play out?
Well, we always hope, unfortunately, Community College San Francisco's misfortune in this situation will become instructional to other systems, as you say. And I think we see that happening throughout the state as time moves forward. So that we don't repeat the same mistakes twice. There's a lot of issues here. So how do you make decisions? Because I believe you're correct. I don't believe there's any trustee who sets out to make a bad decision. But a lot of what we do in multi-year planning tends to be based on assumptions. And also, you have to think of the environment, and I'm going to defend boards a little bit here. Prior to 2007-08, the state of California had unprecedented growth in its economy. And we all kind of assumed moving forward, if you look at the last 10-year horizon, that it was going to always continue. Even when 2007-08 hit and we had a significant downturn, in 2009-10 we went into negative numbers in revenue, everybody assumed, hey, this is a short-term wrinkle in California's economy. And, if we just kind of stay the course and make decisions based on how we have in the past, I don't think anyone really assumed that we were entering an era and a period of what has now become a new norm in California economy and finance for public entities. What occurred, I think, is that we didn't make the shift. Some of us didn't make the shift quick enough, and so you kept assuming it's going to get better. Things are going to improve, and revenues will return. We'll have the kind of growth that we had in between 1990 and 2005, and that's just not going to happen. And so there are a lot of lessons in this, certainly. And from a training perspective, I'm hopeful that people look at the information, at least from a financial perspective, notwithstanding what happens on the program side, and that it's informing to them moving forward.
Member Belinsky, then Member Berg.
Just also say thank you for your report.
You have to talk for her to hear it.
Keep talking, thank you. I haven't read the full report, just the executive summary, but I have a question because of something that actually even happened in my own district. And the curiosity is, for me, were any of these financial issues identified in the annual independent financial audit? And if so, how far back does that go that they were identified?
The answer is, and I'm not trying to be silly or political, yes and no. So you have to understand the structure of the annual audit. Remember that the annual audit is a look in the rearview mirror about what has been in the prior fiscal year. Certainly, so the yes part of your question is you will see findings in, we went back about 5 years, so at least in 5 years of external audits that reoccur in those audits as significant material findings. And the fact that they weren't fixed and or addressed and or possibly got worse will give you a sense that they either weren't taken seriously or there wasn't the ability to fix the system in such a way to mitigate those issues. Whatever the reason or rationale, if you just isolate on the external audit, that you do see material findings that occurred year over year. However, the primary function of the external audit is an analysis of internal controls and the financial statement. And so from that perspective, looking back in the rearview mirror for that 1 year, you had both good and bad. If you looked at a series of audits over the years, you had some that were good, none that were awful, but some good and some bad. But it's such a limited scope relative to obligations, liabilities, and assets as it relates to the bottom line in the financial statement, that it's difficult from an operational point of view to derive a lot of meaning for that projecting forward. Certainly projecting back to learn from where you've been and to fix and address material issues, absolutely. But audits in their form and function are not prospective, unfortunately. And that's just the way the system. It's a very, very good question, and honestly, it's probably a question I get asked 10 times a year, because we have a sense in California that because we have this external audit system, that's going to reveal all issues related to solvency moving forward in the future, and it simply doesn't. It provides a good system if there's a reason for it and a need, and it works, but it's a limited scope, and that's the problem.
Last question, Member Berg.
Not exactly a question. I want to thank you for your report. It was very helpful. It's more helpful than I think you realize, because what I want to say is on the upside, making it a little bit brighter than this report, that this has been very helpful for us, that we have, under the guidance of our chancellor, taken on this report, and one by one we're addressing the issues very seriously. I think that by the end of the year we'll have done really very well. I mean, this brought to attention the fact that we're too big to fail, and we will not fail, but we will address the issues that are going to help us be successful, and we're very, very serious about that. And we have all the constituent groups pretty much represented in this audience, which really makes me happy. Means that we take it seriously, that we're driving up to Sacramento to take it seriously, and we want you to know that we're on our path to have a good, promising audit that will be positive. And we thank you for everything you've done, because there were a lot of things that we didn't know. In response to the questions about trustees, I think trustees need to be more specific about asking questions. I think we tend not to be. We tend to just listen to what we're being told, and we kind of accept it, and I think that that's no longer acceptable. We need to be much more dedicated and much more involved in what we're listening to and getting much more detail. So there's no blame here. There's just no blame. I mean, I think we're a huge college. We're huge. We're all over the city, as you point out. I think that also will have to change. I think that's one of the things that will happen, that we will consolidate, and in fact have begun consolidating. We're no longer going to have campuses that are right around the corner from each other. That's not doable anymore. Remember that we were flush during the good years, and we did we just spread out all over the city. Things are different now, and our behavior will also be different. So I thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay. I have a number of questions, but I think I'll save those for the San Francisco folks. Just real quick, Joel, in your report, it says that the 2012-2013 budget is balanced based on the passage of Proposition
A.
30.
Oh, that
Proposition.
one. We also Proposition A locally.
Proposition.
No, the
Local
revenue for A is
proposition.
not in the budget.
Right, that's what I said, based on Proposition 30. When you were looking at this, since that's an assumption, was there a plan B if 30 doesn't pass? And maybe this is more appropriate for Pam and Mr. President over here. But when you were looking at it, was there? Just quickly.
Yes, I think there's conversation. There's always been conversation around contingency.
Good.
Whether or not it's enough, fast enough, you'll have to ask Pam and her staff. I think they can give you more detail about that, and it's more appropriate for them because that's a real-time issue happening now.
Okay,
So.
Joel, terrific work. Thank you very much for doing this. The board thanks you and your organization
Thank you.
greatly. We're going to take a 5-minute recess, and then we're going to ask